everyone. Thank you for attending our first virtual Marine Science Day. We are excited to have attendees from all over the world joining us today. My name is Christy Pondell. I am a marine scientist at VIMS, and I will be your host for this session. In this session, we are excited to have Dr. Juliet Smith, an assistant professor at VIMS, with us to discuss harmful algal blooms. The first question that everyone wants to hear about is, how do algal blooms increase acidification?
Algal blooms can be connected to increasing acidification in the fact that they themselves change the pH of the water body. So there's evidence, and this is actually a very hot topic right now in HAB science, that as a harmful algal bloom or any algal bloom continues to get larger and cover more of the water body, and the cells get more concentrated in the water, that they themselves are doing photosynthesis and respiration, which pretty much means they're breathing out and breathing in, as an analogy. And as they're doing that, they're changing the pH of the water. So they're almost causing the water to become more acidic and more basic and kind of swing back and forth. And then current research is going on, even right now at FIMS, looking at the mechanisms behind that process that might connect harmful algal blooms or any large algal bloom to making that estuary or coastal system more acidified.
Thank you. So next, what can we do to help prevent harmful algal blooms?
Oh, good question. Okay, so I would say that something you can do in your own backyard would be something like maybe use less fertilizers. So a main idea behind our harmful algal bloom science is that when you add nutrients to your lawn to make your lawn grow plush and green, that those same kind of nutrients, that same nitrogen, phosphorus, if that makes it into the water body, then that can also promote harmful algal blooms or growth of any algae. So I guess within your own backyard, something you could do is consider when you lay your fertilizers, and if you're near a water body, yeah.
Excellent. All right, so let's talk a little bit about why harmful algal blooms are harmful.
Right. Okay, so there's harmful algal blooms can be harmful in many different ways. So as a bloom is growing, it can start to essentially take over the system, and that it can almost decrease the diversity within that system. So over time, a community of phytoplankton and zooplankton can start to shift so that it's really being dominated by one species. So that's decreasing diversity at that period of time. It can also start to change that community in the fact that some of these harmful algal species can produce toxins or grazer deterrents. So that means things that usually feed on the algae now maybe are being suppressed. They can't feed, and they themselves might start to die off and change that community. So then in addition to that, there's many layers here. So then on top of that, you can envision that if a harmful algal bloom is at the surface of the water body, not much light is making it below that. So that can really start to impact the organisms now that are trying to grow, that typically use more light than they're getting access to, because the harmful algal bloom is essentially creating almost a light barrier. And so that can also start to decrease diversity within that water body of organisms that might use the light. And let's see, all right. So then on top of that, when you have your harmful algal bloom at the top, over time, that harmful algal bloom can begin to degrade. So sometimes in our lakes and ponds, you might find that degradation occurring near shore. And so if you were in a pond or a lake and you're walking down and you see kind of a scum kind of brushed up against the side, you can definitely smell that. In that area, you probably have reduced oxygen, because as that bloom starts to break down and rot, it's consuming that oxygen. So that water body right underneath there probably now has a reduced amount of oxygen. In addition to the smell and the odor, the reduced oxygen can have impacts on things like fish and other marine or freshwater organisms who need a certain amount of oxygen in the water to survive. So if it's an organism like a fish, it might be able to leave that environment. But we have other organisms that cannot deal with that. So think of a sessile organism like an oyster or a mussel they're not going to necessarily be able to leave that environment unless they're in one of their younger life stages. And then we have the obvious release of toxins. So we have toxins being stored within the harmful algal cell, and we also can have toxins released into the environment. So you can start to use your imagination to think about how those toxins, either within the algal cell or into the environment, might start to impact other organisms that are sharing that same environment. And that would be the same whether it was a marine or a freshwater environment. And if you were in a freshwater environment, if an organism is using that water body for drinking water, you can see how the toxin can even start to impact terrestrial organisms. I'm going to stop myself there because I could spend a half hour on that topic.
A lot of interest in that topic. We're going to kind of switch for now because I know that this is a high interest question, but I'm sure we'll get back to the toxins in a second. So what do people have to do to have a job like you studying harmful algae blooms?
So what I really love about harmful algal bloom science is that there's so many different disciplines that all work together to do harmful algal bloom science, which is why I enjoy it. So you could go to school to be a biologist, a chemist, you can study the toxins themselves. You can be a physical oceanographer, and you can maybe look how harmful algal blooms are moving around the water body and how they might move between different systems and impact different areas. You could be a modeler, which you could be helpful then in helping everyone understand when blooms might happen and what factors might control those harmful algal blooms. You can also be an economist. So harmful algal blooms can lead to devastation for such agencies like if you were managing a water body or you had a recreational activity that you offered in the water body, or you harvested a seafood product from that water body. So what an economist can do is they can help us understand what kind of impact a harmful algal bloom could have on society, economy, and like cultural traditions that all rely on the water body that was impacted by the HAB. And then you can also work for a state agency. So state agency, that could be a health official. So someone whose job is to protect human health due to the toxins that are produced by harmful algae that can accumulate in seafood. Also, you could work as a resource manager. So you could help to try to control blooms or mitigate blooms when they happen in a water body. And so that means that to get a career working in harmful algal bloom, you can have a variety of paths to get there. So my path was that I finished high school, did 4 years of college, focusing mostly as a biologist with some study into freshwater marine water bodies. And then I moved through my master's and my PhD, and that's where I really started to specialize in harmful algal blooms. But there's many different paths to get here.
Excellent, thank you. All right, so let's get back to the toxins a little bit. Do algae produce different toxins, and how do the toxins affect people and maybe their pets?
Right, so there are many species of harmful algal bloom or algal species that can create harmful algal blooms, both in freshwater and marine environments. And there are also many species of algae that are never harmful. But within the harmful algal bloom ones, there's even ones that some produce toxins and some are just considered harmful because they do some of those other things. Their taste, they can change the taste of your drinking water, they can smell, they can reduce oxygen. So those don't necessarily produce toxins. So it's almost like there's algae, then there's a subset of harmful, and then within that, there are a subset that produce toxins. So within the ones that produce toxins, there is a large range of chemicals, bioactive chemicals that can be produced by algae. And these can have a range of different effects in animals, including humans. So that can be things like, some of them are neurological. Some toxins have a diuretic effect, so it's more like intestinal, which can lead to diarrhea and vomiting. Some can lead to paralysis. Some can be carcinogenic, so they can promote or facilitate tumor promotion, but please don't get scared. So the idea is that all these compounds are being produced But a lot of organisms that have evolved with them have also evolved ways to avoid some of those toxins. And in any of those toxins that can make it into our drinking water or our food supply, those are overseen by federal and state agencies. So if a toxin makes it into a seafood product, it is overseen both at the state level, but also through guidance that is approved through the FDA in the United States. If a toxin in your drinking water is present, then that is again monitored at the facility and the state level, but also through the US EPA. So human consumption or exposure to these harmful algal toxins is being actively monitored. So did that answer the whole question?
I think so, yeah.
Okay.
All right, so the next question, is red tide an example of a harmful algal bloom? It's killed a lot of fish in the Gulf and caused some respiratory issues there. So do we have a similar large-scale harmful algal bloom in the Chesapeake Bay system?
Okay, so that's a couple parts of a question there. So let me start with red tide. So yes, a red tide is definitely a type of harmful algal bloom. So that originates, I think, back to when harmful algal blooms were starting to be described. And a lot of the ones that were most obvious were kind of this red. They would essentially turn the water to a red color. And that red could be bright red down to like a brownish red. And that was very obvious to both scientists and citizens alike, because your water went from blue or bluish green to suddenly red. So initially, I would say that harmful algal blooms were kind of being coined as red tides. Over time, over the last 30 plus years, 40 years, we've realized that harmful algal blooms come in all colors. So we have red tides. We also have blue-green. So a lot of times, if you're moving to a freshwater system, you're in a lake or a pond and you see it wash up against the shore, that's usually going to be a blue-green color, but there can be many colors that can arise there as well. And we can also have, like Chesapeake Bay will have some things that look more like browns in addition to the reds. Okay, so let me figure out part two. Can you remind me part two of that question after the red tide part?
Is it something that we'll see in Chesapeake Bay? Is there a large scale bloom like this in the Chesapeake Bay?
Thank you. So within Chesapeake Bay, we do also get harmful algal blooms, and we do also get red tides. You might have seen it if you're in Chesapeake Bay, in that usually sometime around midday, you might get kind of these like swaths of kind of brown or red running across large expanses of the bay. We see this a lot in the York River and James River. But those harmful algal blooms are not the ones that are currently causing closures in other regions of the country, such as the Gulf was the example given. So that red tide is Karenia brevis. So it's a different species that we currently don't think we have in the Chesapeake Bay. So that's good news for Chesapeake Bay. We do have other harmful algal blooms, but the ones that we're seeing predominantly are ones that have animal health effects, not human health effects. So we're hoping that stays consistent. If we can continue to control our nutrient inputs into the bay, and controls of ballast water so that we're not bringing other species into the bay. But for right now, I would say that overall, Chesapeake Bay has a few species that can be harmful. They're largely right now staying at low abundances, so low concentration, so 2 thumbs up. And I would say that Chesapeake Bay absolutely has blooms. You can typically see them in the summer months, and you might even see the bioluminescence, because we have a couple of species of harmful algal blooms that produce bioluminescence. But again, those ones that you're seeing in large expanses throughout Chesapeake Bay, currently we think are mostly connected to animal health.
Great.
Oh, and so the respiratory distress that would happen around the Gulf, that is caused largely by brevetoxin, which is provided or produced by Karenia brevis, so a red tide species. And so that is creating a respiratory distress.
Thanks. Another question is, you described in your video that When cells reach a density of more than 1,000 cells per milliliter, that's unhealthy. It's considered a harmful algae bloom. So what is a healthier number of algae cells per 1 milliliter?
So that's great. Thanks for coming back to that one. Okay, so an algal bloom of 1,000 cells can still be extremely beneficial. So that comes back to that idea that we can have a high abundance of algae, but as long as it's a really healthy algae, meaning that it's edible and it has a good amount of, it's kind of like eating your potato chip versus your veggie side, right? So we want to stay with algae that are more representative of like high nutrients. They're a good food profile, right? They're a healthy food, and that will then fuel the food web. So we actually do want algal blooms, sometimes at concentrations of 1,000 cells or more. But it should be non-harmful algae. So then when we shift to harmful algae, those algae then are specific species within that subset of larger algae. And so those algae are not necessarily harmful due to just their concentration. They're harmful because they're doing something else to the environment. They're getting to, they're creating these mats on the surface that block light. They're rotting and, causing low oxygen for fish. They're producing toxins. They're becoming to such an abundance greater than 1,000, so maybe to 100,000 cells per mil, where now, they're affecting the taste and smell of your drinking water. So I think that answered that question.
It did.
Okay.
It looks like that is our time for today. Dr. Smith, thank you so much for being here and helping us learn more about harmful algal blooms. It has been a pleasure. You can browse the extensive collection of resources on the home screen. We also want to thank First Advantage Federal Credit Union for supporting this session. Thank you all so much and have a great day.